He ate his first bite of fried chicken in his life with a try-it attitude, and the crispy taste instantly made his orchid fingers curl up to the sky. Then he asked the driver where to throw the bone, but he didn't expect the driver to roll down the window and say that he could just throw it out of the window. Seeing this scene, Dr. Shirley couldn't help laughing, and then imitated the driver, but threw the bone out with a little elegance. However, when waiting for the traffic light, the girl next to him was still stunned by the scene in front of her. The noble white man actually served as a driver for the black man. This was almost impossible in the United States in the 1960s, but facing the girl's gaze, Tony not only didn't care at all, but also sent her the most friendly greetings. However, what no one could have imagined was that Tony was a very extreme racist just a few days ago. His wife just invited 2 black workers to drink a glass of water, and he threw the water cup into the trash can with disgust. After his wife found out, she was very helpless because she couldn't change Tony's racial thinking, so she could only pick up the cup again. In fact, in that era of tense racial issues, Tony's family, as Italian immigrants, also suffered a lot of discrimination because they were not white enough. In order to fully integrate into the white circle, Tony chose to work as a thug in a nightclub where rich people gathered. If anyone dared to make trouble here, the boss only needed to say one word, Tony. Tony would appear immediately and solve all the troubles as quickly as possible, but this was far from enough for Tony. Occasionally, he would bribe the teller with tips and then secretly take away the important items of the guests, and the guests would soon be anxious and furious. And every time at this time, Tony would appear in time, and when the guests were surprised, he would just pretend to help. Not only could he get a lot of tips, but he could also win the favor of the guests. In order to support his family, Tony would always think of various ways to supplement the family expenses, and it would be bright when he returned home after a busy day. But on this day, because he accidentally hit the troublemaker too hard, he accidentally kicked the steel plate. The nightclub was forced to close for several months, and Tony became a homeless man. In order to maintain the expenses of his family, he had to compete with the famous Big Eater. Unexpectedly, the other party ate 24 hot dogs in one breath, and Tony was full just halfway through. When he returned home with a round belly, his wife thought he was crazy. Unexpectedly, he proudly took out $50. It turned out that he ate 26 hot dogs in one breath. Although this money came easily, Tony couldn't eat 26 hot dogs every day. Fortunately, his relatives soon helped him find a way to make a lot of money. A wealthy pianist was recruiting a driver. The salary offered was very considerable. Tony went for an interview immediately after learning about it. Although he was mentally prepared in advance, he couldn't help but be surprised when he saw where the pianist lived. The room was magnificent like a palace, and the dazzling array of treasures was full of luxury. However, what he never expected was that the owner here was actually a black man, and he was different from the black people he had known before. This man was dignified and extraordinary, especially when he sat on the luxurious chair. He looked like a king who was high above. This made Tony very uncomfortable, but for the sake of money, he had to endure it. But Dr. Shirley seemed to have noticed his embarrassment, so she asked him directly if he could not accept working for black people. Tony did not tell the truth, but deliberately beautified the previous incident of black workers into an experience of harmonious coexistence. After hearing this, Dr. Shirley did not continue to ask questions, but quickly cut into the topic of the interview. It turned out that Dr. Shirley planned to go south for a national tour. At that time, discrimination against blacks in the South was very serious, so he needed a driver who could solve the problem. Not only that, the driver also needs to take care of Dr. Shirley's food and daily life. When Tony heard that he had to take care of the black man, he stood up and wanted to leave. Although he was short of money, he still couldn't accept being a butler for a black man. Seeing that he was about to leave, Dr. Shirley hurriedly tried to keep him, saying that you are the most suitable person recommended to me by many people. Seeing him say this, Tony also took the opportunity to put forward his conditions. Not only must his salary increase by 25%, but he must also not take care of Dr. Shirley's food and daily life, otherwise everything is off the table. For Tony, there are many ways to make quick money. He only needs to help his friends do some illegal acts that are discovered by the police and get a generous reward. He doesn't even have to go back to work in the nightclub in the future, but Tony has his bottom line. He would rather pawn his favorite watch than be forced to separate from his family one day. Unexpectedly, Dr. Shirley called early the next morning. He not only agreed to all of Tony's requests, but also carefully asked Tony's wife whether she is willing to let her husband go out as a driver. Although his wife was very sad, considering that she couldn't let him eat 26 hot dogs every day, she reluctantly agreed. On the day of departure, The agent prepaid half of Tony's salary and repeatedly told Tony that his job was to send Dr. Shirley to all the tour locations on time. If he missed any performance, he would not get the rest of the remuneration. Then the agent handed him a green book, which detailed the hotels and restaurants that black people were allowed to enter. In that era, the green book really existed. Black people without this book could not move at all. After the agent left, his wife also came out to see him off. After taking the remuneration Tony had just received, she told Tony to write letters frequently to report his safety. Although he felt that writing letters was a hassle, Tony still obeyed his wife's wishes. After saying goodbye to his wife, Tony took Dr. Shirley on this destined extraordinary journey. Because the two came from different worlds, the gap in status and behavioral habits. As a result, they both disliked each other. Tony thought that the elegant and noble Dr. Shirley was pretentious, and Dr. Shirley thought that the rough and rude Tony was uneducated. As the saying goes, if you don't agree, you won't talk too much. Soon, the two of them went from arguing to silence. However, when passing through a deserted place on the way, Tony suddenly stopped the car to release the water. This vulgar behavior already made Dr. Shirley dissatisfied, and the next second, Tony got off the car and turned back to take the wallet next to the driver's seat. This is undoubtedly a deep-seated distrust of black people, and Dr. Shirley, who is black, felt greatly insulted when he saw this scene. After a long journey all day, they finally arrived at the first stop of the performance and rested in the same hotel. Tony, who went to the balcony to relax late at night, suddenly found that the bandmates who came with Dr. Shirley were chatting happily with local girls. Only Dr. Shirley sat alone on the balcony, drinking whiskey and feeling lonely. Before the performance officially started the next day, Dr. Shirley advised Tony to be civilized after entering the backstage, and not to be as barbaric and vulgar as before. After all, the people he was about to meet were all highly cultured people. Unexpectedly, Tony spread his arms and decided not to enter the inner field, but just listen at the door. And Dr. Shirley also thought this was a good idea. Soon, with the host's grand introduction, the music performance officially kicked off. But what Tony never expected was that Dr. Shirley was actually a well-known piano genius. He learned to play the piano at the age of 3, completed his personal concert at the age of 18, and was invited to perform at the White House twice in the past year. Not only that, he also has 3 doctoral degrees in psychology, music, and art, which can be called a rare composite outstanding talent in contemporary times. Originally, Tony only thought that Dr. Shirley was rich, but now his view of Dr. Shirley has changed a little. Especially when he saw Dr. Shirley fully engaged in the performance, he was fascinated by the beautiful melody in the hall. It's a pity that Shanju couldn't adapt to the fine Bran after all. Not long after, he came out alone and played gambling cards with other drivers. After the performance, Dr. Shirley saw this scene and was very angry and gave him a lecture. How many people are trying their best to climb up, but he just didn't fight for the opportunity. Although he was scolded, Tony didn't feel angry, because he heard the concern in the words and the whipping of his lack of progress. Therefore, in the letter to his wife, in addition to the daily report of food, clothing, housing, and transportation, he mentioned and praised Dr. Shirley for the first time. However, just when the relationship between the two eased a little, they quarreled again because of a trivial matter. On the way to the next performance place, Tony accidentally saw a stall selling jade. Tony wanted to get off the car to buy one for his wife, but found that a piece had fallen on the ground. Adhering to the principle of maximizing benefits, he stuffed it directly into his pocket when no one was paying attention. Unexpectedly, this scene was discovered by Dr. Shirley, who couldn't stand his driver stealing things. He forced Tony to return the jade. At first, Tony thought it was not stealing at all, but under Dr. Shirley's insistence, he finally had to compromise. He could only reluctantly choose to return the property to its original owner. In this way, in this childish and angry behavior, the two soon arrived at the next performance venue. But when Tony checked the scene as usual, he was surprised to find that there was only a shabby piano here, and the piano was cluttered with garbage. Tony was full of resentment and immediately found the relevant staff and solemnly asked them to replace the shabby piano with a top-level Steinway piano, according to the contract. Unexpectedly, the other party was not only unwilling to replace it, but also maliciously mocked Dr. Shirley for being black. At first, Tony wanted to negotiate in a civilized manner, but when he heard the other party mocking his Italian identity again, he couldn't bear it and slapped him in the face and finally got a new piano as he wished. Tony had never felt discriminated against so directly before, and he didn't understand how uncomfortable it felt to be discriminated against. At this moment, He seemed to sympathize with Dr. Shirley's situation, so when he wrote to his wife again, he used a longer article to praise Dr. Shirley's charm when playing. Not only that, on the way to the next destination, he took the initiative to chat with Dr. Shirley about family matters. Only then did he know that Dr. Shirley had been married. But because he could not balance the dual identities of husband and musician, the marriage ended in failure. However, just as Dr. Shirley was immersed in the sadness of the past, Tony suddenly shouted excitedly. It turned out that they had arrived in Kentucky at this time and must order a local specialty KFC. But when Tony bought the fried chicken with great interest and ate it, Dr. Shirley refused to try even one piece. Not only that, Dr. Shirley also said that she had never eaten fried chicken since she was a child. Although Dr. Shirley did not clearly explain the reason for not eating, but Tony guessed the reason immediately, but at this time he had no intention to consider the extended meaning, just advised Dr. Shirley not to miss this delicious dish. In the end, Dr. Shirley could not resist his enthusiasm, and raised her orchid finger to taste it carefully, and the two of them ate fried chicken happily together. He also excitedly threw the leftover bones out of the window, but when Tony threw the empty Coke cup out of the window, Dr. Shirley immediately changed to a serious face. Because in Dr. Shirley's opinion, bones will be eaten by animals or decompose naturally, but plastic cups will only pollute the environment, so Tony had no choice but to pick up the cup. As the two continued to go south, racial discrimination became more and more serious. For this reason, Dr. Shirley could only stay in the only dilapidated hotel on the Green Book at night. Originally, he wanted to drink a little wine as usual, and then go back to the room to sleep. Unexpectedly, his elegant sitting posture and straight suit attracted the sarcasm of other black compatriots. Tony, who lived in the hotel next door, was choosing a restaurant to go to with Dr. Shirley tomorrow according to the guide in the Green Book. Suddenly, there was a hurried knock on the door. When he opened it, he learned that Dr. Shirley was in trouble. It turned out that Dr. Shirley, who was depressed after being sarcastically ridiculed by his compatriots, came to the bar alone, but was beaten up by several white people. When Tony hurriedly arrived, there were already several bruises on his face. Tony asked them to let Dr. Shirley go quickly. Unexpectedly, the other party took out a dagger and asked him to get out of the way. Seeing this, Tony did not fight recklessly, but put his hands behind his back and made a gesture of pulling out a gun. At first, the gangsters thought he was bluffing, so they did not intend to end the fight. But the bar owner did not dare to take the risk, so he picked up a shotgun to stop both sides. Dr. Shirley, who was drunk, was rescued, but Tony suddenly got furious, because he had repeatedly told Dr. Shirley not to go out alone, especially at night. Otherwise, it would be easy to get into trouble. Dr. Shirley had to keep apologizing like a child who had made a mistake. At this time, he had only one question in his mind, whether Tony really had a gun on him, and Tony directly denied it. Fortunately, this accident did not affect the performance the next day. Dr. Shirley won the applause of the whole audience again with his superb skills. However, Tony, who was standing aside, felt a little sad. Dr. Shirley was such a shining person, but she was humiliated by a few gangsters because of her skin color. Only on the stage can you get the respect you deserve. After the performance, the two of them went south without stopping. As a result, the car suddenly broke down in the middle of the journey due to the hot weather, and Tony had to get off the car to cool down the engine. Then, Dr. Shirley also came out to check the situation. Unexpectedly, he met the eyes of his compatriots when he looked up. It turned out that they were parked around farmland, and the black slaves were working hard under the scorching sun. But when Dr. Shirley got off the car, he immediately attracted everyone's attention. The same skin color, but completely different fate. The black slaves were full of doubts. They couldn't believe that black people could be served by white people. Dr. Shirley's heart was much more complicated. He sympathized with the unfair exploitation of black slaves, but he was also glad to achieve a class leap. But he soon realized that he had no dignity like the black slaves. That night, Dr. Shirley was invited to a private manor. He was warmly sought after and praised during the performance, but he was forced to eat fried chicken at dinner. Speaking of which, we have to mention the era of black slaves in the United States in the early 19th century. Although black slaves had been legally liberated, the premise was that they had to have enough money to redeem themselves. However, their white masters were not willing to see the former slaves standing on the same level as themselves, so they restricted the blacks from raising large livestock such as cattle and sheep. In order to prevent them from saving enough money to gain freedom, the only option for blacks was the relatively cheap chicken. The high-calorie fried chicken they needed to supplement their bodies was born. But in the eyes of some racists, cheap fried chicken has become the standard for blacks, especially when white people try to treat blacks to fried chicken. This behavior is considered a serious act of discrimination. Not only that, even to go to the toilet during the period, they had to go to the simple toilet exclusively for blacks. In order to avoid discrimination and contempt, Dr. Shirley would rather choose to spend half an hour to solve it in the hotel. However, the owner of the manor said that they were willing to wait. Tony couldn't understand why Dr. Shirley was so serious, and couldn't understand why he was so angry, but he could still smile at everyone calmly. If he had been humiliated in this way, he would have fought back, even with verbal rebukes and physical force, but in the end, no one could give him a clear answer. After that, the tour went on as usual. Tony also wrote letters to his wife from time to time, but Dr. Shirley couldn't stand it that day because he felt that Tony's letters were of no standard. There was no way to express his inner love, so he began to guide word by word and finally wrote a beautiful love letter. Sure enough, his wife was moved to tears after receiving it, thinking that this straightforward husband had finally learned to express himself. After this heart-to-heart and in-depth communication, the emotional bond between the two was undoubtedly further sublimated. The relationship between Tony and Dr. Shirley became closer, and they even made appointments to go shopping for clothes together. However, when Dr. Shirley walked into a suit store and wanted to try on one of the suits, he was ruthlessly stopped by the white clerk. Although the other party said it very tactfully, Dr. Shirley knew that it was naked discrimination. But he couldn't lose his temper with anyone, so he could only release the anger from the depths of his soul by constantly hitting the keys during the performance that night. Not only that, after the performance, he also had an in-depth exchange with the same sex, but he didn't expect to be caught on the spot by the discipline police. When Tony arrived after learning the news, he didn't even have a towel on his body. Although Tony finally succeeded in bailing Dr. Shirley out with his eloquence and superpowers that no one could resist. But Dr. Shirley, because of her inferiority and anger in her heart, accused Tony of deliberately showing a friendly attitude because he was afraid of not getting the final payment. In addition, the police's behavior should not be rewarded. The innocent Tony was instantly furious after hearing this, and the two quarreled and parted unhappily. Until the next stop of the performance the next day, the cold atmosphere had not completely dissipated. What's worse is that just after Tony got off the car, he ran into two friends at the entrance of the hotel. Seeing that he worked for a black man, his friends teased Tony in Italian, asking how he ended up working as a subordinate for a black man. After hearing this, Tony did not respond, but smiled and said goodbye at 8 o'clock in the evening. However, when he was about to go to the appointment, he found that Dr. Shirley had already been waiting at the door. Dr. Shirley could actually understand Italian. In view of the fact that Tony might really give up his job, Dr. Shirley offered him a promotion and salary increase to retain him. Unexpectedly, Tony said that Dr. Shirley had given him enough, and Tony came here only to politely reject his friend's kindness in person. Hearing this, Dr. Shirley finally felt relieved and apologized for his rudeness last night, and for the first time, Tony expressed his understanding of what Dr. Shirley did last night in a tactful tone. After this incident, the relationship between the two became closer. Dr. Shirley began to tell his story, and Tony unknowingly dared to resist racists. Everything seemed to be going in a good direction until this rainy night. The two people who were on their way were suddenly stopped by a police car. Tony was already annoyed because he couldn't see the road clearly, and the traffic police was a racist who bullied others. Not only did he make Tony go through the rain to be checked, but he also made Dr. Shirley get off the car in the rain, and even mocked Tony for being half black from Italy. Tony, who couldn't bear it anymore, didn't want to bear it anymore, and punched him as a punishment. But this time the punch not only didn't solve the problem, but he was also locked up in the police station for assaulting the police. Since tomorrow was the last stop of the performance, Dr. Shirley was very worried that he couldn't go on as scheduled, so he called a lawyer for help. Dr. Shirley couldn't help but complain that Tony was too impulsive, and Tony knew he was in the wrong, so he huddled in the corner and kept silent. But soon he became extremely excited again. It turned out that Dr. Shirley's phone call just now was to the brother of the then president. Tony never thought that Dr. Shirley had such connections. So, after coming out of the police station, he kept chattering and even said that he could be rescued by the president's brother. He could be proud of it for the rest of his life. However, Dr. Shirley felt very ashamed, because in his opinion, this was an abuse of power. This was just an act that only people with low character would do. Unexpectedly, this sentence directly angered Tony. Tony angrily said that he was indeed not as high and mighty as Dr. Shirley. Compared with Dr. Shirley, Tony was more like a black man, running around for a living all day long. After hearing this, Dr. Shirley immediately asked Tony to stop the car, and then rushed into the night despite the heavy rain. When Tony tried to get him back in the car, Dr. Shirley finally couldn't stand it anymore and said to Tony emotionally, "You always only see my bright and beautiful appearance, but never understand the loneliness deep in my heart. I tried my best to change the status quo, but in the end, I ended up being neither a human nor a human. Neither accepted by the white community nor recognized by the black community. At this point, I don't even know who I am, let alone whether I can still be called a real man." It was not until then that Tony understood Dr. Shirley's dilemma, and he also felt powerless. After all, this was not a problem that could be solved by force. After the heavy rain stopped, the emotions of the two also eased. They drove until the second half of the night before they found a shabby hotel willing to take in black people. That night, Tony lived with Dr. Shirley for the first time. Now, he didn't need Dr. Shirley's help to write letters. Although his writing was a little immature, he was already a master. When he learned that Dr. Shirley had a younger brother who he hadn't contacted for many years, Tony suggested that he should write a letter to his younger brother. Because many people in this world are lonely because they are afraid to take the first step. Although Dr. Shirley told him not to meddle in other people's business, there was obviously emotion in his dark eyes. The next day, they finally arrived at the last stop of the tour. At first, the supervisor who received them was polite. He even asked them to park the car at the door, saying that this was a special treatment for VIPs, but the next second, he took them in through the back door. Then he took them to a utility room next to the kitchen and solemnly introduced the lounge specially prepared for them. Looking at the small space of less than 1 square meter, Dr. Shirley and Tony were a little helpless. But in order to bring the tour to a perfect end, both of them tacitly did not raise any objections. Because Dr. Shirley needed to change clothes, Tony went to the restaurant to eat first. At this time, the other two companions also arrived as scheduled, and the three of them talked about the unfair utility room again. And Tony couldn't help sighing again. Why did Dr. Shirley, such a favored person, have to come to the South to endure such treatment? Last time, no one told Tony the reason. This time, his companions decided to help him solve the puzzle. The reason why Dr. Shirley gave up the 3-time salary and admirable treatment in the North to come to the Southern region, where discrimination is the most serious. It was because Dr. Shirley wanted to protest against social injustice with his own actions. However, injustice is a mountain, and it is not easy to shake it. Just like Dr. Shirley was a heavyweight guest invited to perform, but he was even refused to enter the restaurant for dinner. Maybe he had enough of the oppression for many days, or maybe he learned to resist from Tony. This time, Dr. Shirley didn't want to continue to tolerate it. If he was not allowed to eat in the restaurant, Dr. Shirley would refuse to perform here tonight. But even so, the front desk manager still looked disdainful, and even called Tony aside privately, trying to bribe him with extra tips to persuade Dr. Shirley not to be ungrateful. Feeling insulted, Tony wanted to use violence again, but was stopped by Dr. Shirley, who arrived in time. Dr. Shirley knew that Tony needed money very much, and knew that he would not get the final payment if he went on strike. So in the end, Dr. Shirley gave the decision to Tony, and Tony only thought for a second. He pulled Dr. Shirley out of the restaurant in a chic manner. He really needed money and wanted to make money. But at this moment, he wanted to maintain his friend's dignity more. After leaving the restaurant, in order to fill their stomachs, the two came to a black bar. When they first entered the door, everyone cast strange and scrutinizing eyes at them. The boss was even more curious and asked Dr. Shirley, "What do you do in a suit and tie?" At first, Dr. Shirley was reluctant to reveal his identity, but Tony persuaded him. He first glanced at the piano on the stage, then walked over and played a song. The beautiful melody floated to every corner of the bar. The noisy crowd suddenly became quiet, and when the song ended, 3 more people walked onto the stage and performed a completely free performance with him. The audience started dancing to their heart's content, and Dr. Shirley on the stage also completely let go of her reserve and blended into this environment that she had never experienced before. Tony cheered and applauded not far away, feeling relieved that his friend had finally found a place to belong. But reality is not always 100% beautiful. When the two walked out of the bar tipsy, Tony suddenly stopped Dr. Shirley and fired 2 shots into the air. The 2 thieves hiding behind the car were so scared that they fled. It turned out that when they first entered the bar, Dr. Shirley was targeted by the thieves because of her bright clothes and a lot of money in her hand. Fortunately, Tony was very alert and was not attacked. Tony warned Dr. Shirley not to show off his wealth, but Dr. Shirley said, "I know you have a gun." After a dangerous episode, the two started their return journey without stopping, because Tony had promised his wife that he would be home before Christmas. However, not long after they got on the road, the heavy rain turned into heavy snow. Just when Tony was complaining about the weather, Dr. Shirley suddenly frowned and said seriously, "Then you have to take out the lucky stone to bless us with safety in the future." It turned out that Dr. Shirley had always known that Tony had not returned the stone, and Tony also obediently placed the stone on the front panel. But the lucky stone did not seem to bring luck. When they were driving in the snowy night, the car was suddenly stopped by a police car. Fortunately, this time the police reminded them that the tire was punctured and helped them change the tire. Although he felt a little warmth in the cold winter night, Tony was exhausted from the long drive. For safety, he decided to stay in a hotel temporarily. It seemed that he could not fulfill the agreement with his wife. On the other side, the house was already full of relatives and friends. The dinner was about to start. His wife looked out the window from time to time with worry in her eyes. Christmas songs were heard one after another on the street. Fortunately, they finally got back smoothly. It was just that the driver was Dr. Shirley, and Tony was snoring in the back seat. When he woke up, he found that he had arrived home. After getting off the car, Tony invited Dr. Shirley to visit his home. But Dr. Shirley just smiled and said, "Merry Christmas," and then drove away into the night. Tony returned to his small home and felt the care from the whole family. But the noble Dr. Shirley could only stay in the villa, bearing the loneliness in his heart alone. There were countless treasures in his room, but he only cared about the lucky stone in his hand. Tony was absent-minded at the table, and his family thought he was unusually quiet. Some even asked if the black boss upset him. Tony was disgusted and ordered his family not to insult black people again. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Tony rushed to open the door after hearing it, only to find that it was Dr. Shirley, who was so nervous that she was at a loss. It turned out that he finally broke through his inner cowardice and bravely took the first step to get rid of loneliness. Tony was also very happy about his arrival and immediately stepped forward to give him a big hug. At first, everyone else looked at each other awkwardly, but soon accepted this special guest, especially Tony's wife, who was against racial discrimination, now saw the changes in the whole family, and her face was full of relief. Not only that, she actually always knew that it was Dr. Shirley's help that made her husband so talented. It made their feelings even stronger. In the end, the wife gave a grateful hug and whispered to Dr. Shirley to thank her for teaching her husband to write letters. Green Book is directed by Peter Farrelly, Mahershala Ali, and Viggo Mortensen lead the lead. A drama film released in 2018. This film is adapted from real events. Tony worked as a thug in a nightclub because of his agility and toughness. In order to make a living, he became the driver of Dr. Shirley, a black man. His main job was to escort Dr. Shirley all the way south for a tour. Due to their different backgrounds and identities, the two were always at loggerheads on the road. But as they spent more and more time together, the discrimination they felt became deeper and deeper. Tony gradually came to understand Dr. Shirley and realized the harm that discrimination brought to people. In the end, he not only changed his attitude towards black people, but also became a lifelong friend with Dr. Shirley. It was not until 2013 that the two died one after another. Well, today's movie sharing ends here. Welcome everyone to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for your patience. Looking forward to meeting you next time.